I just remember sitting at my desk and just like rubbing my legs and just, breathing and trying to release my shoulders. You see the money running out and you see the bank account getting lower and lower. I learned to become the money, and that changed everything. In the summer of 2019, I found myself for the first time in my adult life unemployed. I also had a 13-year-old daughter at the time. I had student loan debt. I had credit card debt. Didn't really have a savings. It was at a crossroads. I was visiting my family. I had my daughter with me because I always take her to visit her grandparents in the summertime. I decided we're going to learn how to make things this summer. And so soap was one of those things that I was curious about learning how to make. One of the recipes called for aloe vera, and I didn't have any aloe vera. But what we did have were nopales. Nopalera is the name of the cactus plant, or what you call in English the prickly pear cactus. So I went out into the yard and I cut up penca, and I used the inside instead of aloe vera, and that's how the idea was born, to make a cactus soap. Here is this sustainable, ancient plant, culturally symbolic, that I have known and been eating my whole life. And I could build a high-end Latina brand around this plant and speak to a whole community that had historically been overlooked in the beauty space. And so it was in that moment that I decided I was going to build something. When I had the idea for Nopalera, I had no money to start a business. So I used my credit card to buy ingredients in small quantities, and I worked out a payment plan with my branding designer. The minute that I turned on the website, it was like a magnet. The customers came, the wholesale accounts came. I really felt like I had hit on something that was truly missing in the market. It was around the end of the second year when I realized I was going to have to raise real capital to invest in inventory, to invest in product innovation, to hire people. I felt very anxious. I felt desperate because the credit card can only take me so far. You see the money running out and you see the bank account getting lower and lower. And every day you still have to show up and pitch your brand and pitch this big idea and ask for a lot of money. And it's I don't know how else to explain it, but it's anxiety inducing. Here I am trying to sell an aspirational Latina brand. And so a lot of investors, they don't see that because it's not their world. I also had to first bust through the ceiling in my own mind of what I thought I could raise. My initial ask was $250,000. And even the investors that I pitched to initially for the very first time even asked me, why are you asking for so little? I went to an event in Los Angeles where I got to hear venture capitalist Arlan Hamilton speak. She said, when you don't have money, you have to become the money. And it was in that moment where it clicked. I had to embody that spirit and that energy of money in order to be able to attract investors to me. I think a lot of us carry money wounds that we're not familiar with, or we don't realize that they are that. And this whole process of starting a business and raising capital really had to make me look inward about my own thoughts and what I assumed was true. And what I realized is that I had this just enoughness kind of mentality. That's why my initial ask when I met my very first investor was only for $250,000. And when they asked me, why are you asking for so little? My answer was, because I only want to raise what I need. But when we're talking about building a business and raising capital and having a runway, it's not just about the very minimal thing that you need. It's about the vision and how much you need to execute that vision. The thing about raising money is now, in retrospect, I can see it is so much tied into how you show up as the founder and your confidence level. That is ultimately what people are investing in. So all through the process of the raise, I kept upping the amount of money that I needed, and I finally landed on $2 million. And so after no, after no, after no, after no, and finally, meeting a fund that was a Latino fund that understood the opportunity for the Latino market, they decided they wanted to give the $2 million, but I had all these angel investors that were already interested. So it ended up being $2.7 million in the end. And towards the end, was still getting people texting me like, is it too late to invest? I was like, yes, where have you been for the last 3 months? It's too late. That really just proved the point that money begets money. Nothing would have changed if I had not invested in myself. The thing with scarcity is that when you live in that experience, it becomes truth. You just think that anything else is not possible. You think that living paycheck to paycheck is the only way. I lived that way for decades, so I'm speaking from experience. I didn't know that it was possible to make more money. I didn't know it was possible to hire employees. I didn't know it was possible to raise millions of dollars. And so the first thing is to recognize your own limiting beliefs. The most powerful story that we tell is the one we tell ourselves. And that includes your thoughts. It's like a cassette tape, and you get to change that loop. So, for example, if you have heard yourself say, "I'm broke, I'm not good at math, that must be nice, that'll never be me," you are essentially creating that reality for yourself. So I learned to really monitor my thoughts, and if I caught myself saying something like that, I would just rewrite it and give it a new thought and say that over and over. So it's up to you to decide what you want to tell yourself about yourself. It's not up to anyone else.